Good evening, everyone. Can you all hear me okay? Somebody told me at the last program for the first time that I speak very softly. I was like, that's interesting. It's a little echoey though. Maybe just turn it down a little bit, Manny. Thank you, Manny. In the AV room, when I'm up here, I have total trust. It's wonderful to have somebody share that space. Have you seen back there? It's wild. There's so many screens. I don't know. I almost don't know what to do up here with no screens, but we'll see what happens. That's not in the text. So, we're off to a great start. The thing that I want to look at with you all tonight is so deep and profound that I think I go to humor just because I feel like I'm not worthy of it in a way. So let's see if we can drop down to another level and enter into this exploration. But first, to just acknowledge the beautiful changing of the season. The cool air today was cold this morning, I think, and the turning of the leaves is especially on those first trees as you walk towards the river house from the parking lot on the west side. They're all just this gorgeous yellow. If you look to the left, it's just stunning. And it's so interesting because in the, let's see, I guess maybe 15 years, 15 autumns, I've walked that path and seen that, it's changed over time. There's a tree that was there that died, and a new one that Donna Bone, landscape architect, has helped us put in, along with hundreds of other trees here in this incredible oasis. And so it's both the same and different. There's something that remains, and there's something that always changes. And we've just ended this remarkable season of a kind of what we call the program season. Is that what we call it? After spring practice period, we go right into being with dying, then planting life, young adult sesshin, inner practice of medicine. There's a prajna retreat in there somewhere. Zen circle with haiku and the Bodhidharma. How many people were here for that? That was really incredible. No? Okay. Yeah. And then the grace training, which just feels like it just happened. And love and death, this last weekend, which really did just happen with Roshi and Frank Ostaseski. And I just want to especially thank our dear Frank Ostaseski, who shows up for, as he said, everything Roshi asks. Thank you, Roshi, for asking. And his presence here, his way of being is just so wonderful to sit with. He's online so much for us. He does these wonderful programs. But when he's here in the flesh, it's something else. And last weekend, we had that wonderful Dharma talk with Roshi and Frank. So deep bows to Frank. Throughout, of course, this season, we've also had a series of powerful online programs, the Awareness in Action series, which continues. So many other programs, and many of our in-person programs are all online as well. And just feeling these kind of changes in the season and as we move into practice period next week. So we've gone from our program season into another practice period. I just think of this breathing body of Upaya, breathing in the kind of guest season, all these programs, and breathing out into the deep practice. And that this is, thanks hugely to Roshi Joan. And what a privilege it is to sit with you all through these different seasons and to bear witness to the practice and the aspirations and the dialogue and the laughter of so many. So thank you, Roshi, for creating this place and this cycle, which is so fulfilling and enlivening. Such a gift. So as you may recall, in February, even before our practice period, spring practice period, we started on this exploration of the Mahayana Sutras. And I started us off with the Prajnaparamita Sutra in 8,000 lines. And somehow I got some of our fellow priests to come along and do a few of these explorations. And so we looked at the Prajnaparamita Sutras for a few weeks, and then the Diamond Sutra and the Empty Bowl Sutra, Pushin. And, in one version of reality, we were going to go through a series of Mahayana Sutras for the rest of the year. And maybe there would be some talks from other things thrown in, but mostly we would be sticking to a kind of program. But it just so turned out we didn't need to do that. We had so many wonderful Wednesday talks that were around programs, that were part of programs. We had incredible guest speakers like Guagu, Rebecca Solnit, Roshi and Frank, and others. And so we had a period of time during the kind of program season where we did these other things. And so it was with great joy that Fushin, I think when were you going to first give that Dharma talk? Like in June? And he had decided he was going to talk about the Vimalakirti Sutra as part of that series. And it kept getting pushed out because of one thing or another. And finally, about a month ago, he got to give that talk. And so we then took back up, in a way, our exploration of the sutras and of the Bodhisattva way. So thank you, Fushin, for bringing Vimalakirti to us. This text, as he taught about, is a seminal text of the Mahayana tradition. This is a lay bodhisattva, Vimalakirti. And as Fushin related, he really shows us how to live with an awakened mind through embracing vulnerability. Do you all remember? He spoke of beautiful stories of himself and of Roshi and of that young girls group. And as Fushin said, each person is a brief constellation of awareness in this infinite universe, capable of boundless compassion precisely because we are open, tender, and willing to show up to our lives fully. Thank you, Fushin. And then next week, Dainan continued with our exploration of the Bodhisattva commitment and how we live the Bodhisattva vows, especially in times of crisis. And her talk was right after the grace training, where we looked deeply at how we can practice and learn techniques that can help us in the lived situations of crisis in our own lives and in the crises of the world, which are deeply based on the contemplative practices that have their formation at the Buddha's time and throughout these teachings. I was especially struck by Dainan's discussion of some teachings that Roshi relates on motivation and intention. Motivations, which are the pre-conscious conditioned responses that we've inherited from our environment and our upbringing, these motivations, which can be triggered by a walk down Times Square or even a walk through your browser window online, all of these inputs that somehow cause you to think and do things that you probably wouldn't if you hadn't had those inputs. Like, I suddenly want to buy that AI device that follows me around every day. Think it would be a really good idea. And then later you're like, wait, what? So, and then intentions, which are more of our conscious motivations, or not motivations, our conscious intentions that are based on our values. What do we really care about? What do we really want for our lives? And so what enables us to engage in right action, in the appropriate response? What inspires us to embrace our bodhisattva vows, to work for the liberation of beings and ourselves? What can help us align our motivations, and our intentions? Those are the questions that I've really been thinking about. So I was so glad you brought that up, Dinan. And at one point I thought, I want to give a talk on free will and really explore what that is. And that's a whole sticky wicket, which we might get into, not tonight, but another time. But it really became more about that intention, that vow, that aspiration. What is it that moves us to act, that moves us to align with what we feel was good and right? And so then Roshi and Frank last week gave this beautiful example of compassion and wisdom in their exchange, their Dharma exchange and dialogue with the community on life, death, and freedom. I was really moved by not just their presence with the speakers, but also with how each of their interlocutors was so vulnerable and present and open. And that was just really moving. And so, as one participant characterized the evening, that was a masterclass in not knowing. If you didn't see that, please check it out just last week. So then, in thinking about this, how do I want to approach a talk after that? You know, I joked like, maybe we should just have dialogue, and that could be fun. Also very scary, I have to say. But get ready, because we're going to do a little talking together. But I wanted to go back to that question of motivation and intention and ask you all, as practitioners, or just as yourselves, but particularly as Buddhist practitioners, what do you feel are some of our primary values? What are the values upon which we might base our intentions for our practice in life? And you can just call out something and I'll repeat it for the online community. Core values for us.
Radical acceptance.
Radical acceptance. Thank you.
Generosity.
Generosity.
Inseparability.
Inseparability. Yes.
Compassion.
Compassion.
Patience.
Truth.
Truth and patience.
Interconnection.
Interconnection. Interconnectedness. Yes.
To be of service.
To be of service. Indeed. So good.
Awakening.
Awakening. Okay, that was the one I was looking for. Very good, thank you. Those are all excellent values and definitely related to our path of practice. Things that we aspire to, and I think all would agree are ways of right action, of inspiring right action. But this word, awakening, what is that? It's kind of, it feels in a way like an uber value for Buddhists, right? Because quite literally, Buddha means, anybody know? The awakened one. And so Buddhism is quite literally the ism or philosophy or mode of practice of awakening. And so, what is that? It's the goal, not just the goal, but it's kind of the defining characteristic of this whole tradition of Buddhism. So what do we wake up to? What is awakening, or what, yeah, and we just want to say some words again. What is awakening? What do we wake up to? What does that mean for you? We wake up to our delusions. We awaken from our delusions, perhaps. Yes.
We wake up to the nature of our mind.
The nature of our mind. Yes.
Interconnectedness.
Presence and interconnectedness. Yeah.
Impermanence.
Impermanence. It's a good one. Yes.
Reality.
Reality. We wake up to what's really true instead of our delusions. What's your word, Senko? You can feel it.
I was thinking about Suzuki Roshi's things as it is.
Things as it is. or truth?
Truth.
Yes. So you've said all of these, there's some kind of traditional categories of things we wake up to. The nature of reality, right? So what are the things that characterize what's actually here and what's not? Make believe in our minds. Some of those things we talk about emptiness or boundlessness. We wake up to the truth of emptiness. We wake up to interconnectedness. We wake up to Buddha nature. We might also wake up to the three marks of existence, which are impermanence, suffering, and no self. Good. Sorry, am I being too pedantic? I just love engaging with you all.
Hear you.
Am I a little quiet? Oh, let's see. I don't want to get too echoey. Yeah. Then there's the causes of suffering. We wake up to what are those afflictions that lead to suffering? And the typical ones are greed, hatred, delusion, and add on envy and pride to make a clean 5 or a dirty 5, I guess. And what did the Buddha wake up to? Traditionally, it said, well, there's the Four Noble Truths and the Noble Eightfold Path. He woke up to a path of practice to free us from suffering. And then, of course, there's the idea of truth or true reality. We just did the Gate of Sweet Nectar this morning, our new moon ceremony. And there's a line in there where we say the Dharma realm of true reality. And I remember when Bernie Glassman, Roshi, was here teaching us about the Gate of Sweet Nectar, he said, you know, we chant it this way, but if I had to do it over, I would take that out because I don't really believe in truth. Like, okay, so I would take out true reality. It's like, wow. Because it's just opinions. Maybe it's the Dharma world of opinions or something like that. And he had this profound teaching on emptiness that was that everything is just your opinion, man. Don't get so attached to what you think is the truth. And so that's one way of looking at it. And I really love this phrase from the early Buddhist text, yata bhuta jnana dasana, to know and see reality as it is. That is one way of characterizing the awakening of the Buddha, to know and see reality as it is. So it doesn't have to be like, oh, it's truth versus falsehood. It's just to not be deluded, right? To be clear, to not see the coiled rope and think, oh, it's a snake, it's going to bite me. It's like, no, it's a coiled rope, not dangerous. That's the classic example of a delusion. What is there? And so in our practice, there's so many ways we talk about awakening and what we awaken to. There's that philosophical and kind of practice-oriented, the Buddha nature and emptiness. Then there's often what we talk about, especially in engaged Buddhism, wake up to what's happening. Wake up to yourself. See what's arising in your own body. Know your reactions. It's a little more psychological in a way. Wake up to what's happening in the world and what we can do to serve. And so in all cases, it seems we're going for non-ignorance, right? How do we stop being ignorant? How do we stop ignoring reality and facing, what's really there? And Buddha nature might seem like one of those philosophical ones, one of the ones that we don't think about so much because it's like, one, you can't think about it, right? It's beyond words and description. And two, it can get heady. We can talk about what it means, but then it starts to get like into philosophical discussions that seem like they're not pertinent to life. And yet Buddha nature is at the foundation of our tradition and practice. And so I really wanted to look at that and see how we could bring it into our lives. So a little bit more not really dialogue, but popcorn. What is Buddha nature? What do you think it is? Or what have you heard it is? What's Buddha nature, Daigon?
Unconditioned.
The unconditioned? Or you didn't use even the article, just unconditioned. Nice. What else?
Suchness.
Suchness. Good. Yeah. Buddha nature pervades the whole universe, existing right here, now. What is that?
Non-dual.
Non-dual.
Love.
Love. Nice. Any others? What is Buddha nature to you?
Compassion.
Compassion.
Right view, right action.
Right view, right action is our Buddha nature.
Awareness itself.
Awareness itself. Nice. Yeah.
Space.
Space. Yeah, what's really interesting about this question is, of course, we can go into our mind of like, what have we heard Buddha nature is? But if you know that Buddha nature exists right here and now, you can actually look at it. Or maybe you can't look at it, but it's there right now. So they say. I was really hoping someone would shout moo at me at some point here. Or she's too far away, or you this thing. Yes. So to look into Buddha nature a little bit, and then also thinking about what could I possibly do to follow up on the wonderful talks that have come in the last few weeks, I thought I'd also return to a text from the Mahayana tradition. How many of you have heard of the Śrīmālā, Queen Srimala's lion's roar? Not many yet. What you have? You loaned me the book. Thank you, Bushin. So the Śrīmālā Devi Simhanada Sutra was the lion's roar of Queen Srimala. But how many people have heard the word Queen Srimala? Yeah, I hope all the residents might have heard this word, because we chant it when we chant the women ancestors, right? We chant Queen Srimālā and Antoku Inden Kasho Myoke Zeni. We get bonus points. Who is Antoku Inden Kasho Myoke Zeni? Anybody know? It's somebody say? Thank you, Roshi. A plus. Mayazumi's mother. Isn't that cool? So now you can remember that. Because they say in the lay women who have carried the Dharma, Queen Srimala and Antoku Inden Kasho Myoke Zeni, of course, many others. But Queen Srimala is upheld in the tradition as this wonderful lay person who was also this incredible teacher and gave this or was part of this story that became this sutra, which is not very long. You could read it through in an hour or so. I don't recommend it to read it that way, but that's about the length, about 50 pages. And so Śrīmālā Devi, like Vimalakirti, was a famous lay practitioner, and it seemed like a nice follow-up to the Vimalakirti Sutra. And the Vimalakirti Sutra was written about they say the first or second century of the Common Era, and the Śrīmālā Devi Sutra was just maybe a century later. Could have been at the same time, but pretty close on, the second to the fourth. And whereas the Vimalakirti goes deeply into the emptiness and the non-dual kind of aspects of the teaching, and the lion's roar, of course, of Vimalakirti is his noble silence. That there's really nothing you can say about this stuff. I mean, they didn't talk about Buddha nature per se, but about emptiness, about boundlessness, about the nature of reality. There's nothing you could really say. You could say so many things apophatically in negation, but ultimately silence was the only way to approach it. And so Śrīmālā Devi represents a turn in the teaching. We often hear of the 3 turnings of the wheel of Dharma. And I believe as it goes, the second turning, so the first turning is the kind of classic teachings on the Noble Eightfold Path. The second turning is the emptiness teachings. And the third turning is the Tathagata Garbha, or Buddha nature teachings. So Buddha nature is the translation for the word Tathagata Garbha, which literally means the womb of the Tathagata. And the Tathagata is an epithet of the Buddha, or not an epithet, but another word for Buddha. It means the thus come one, or the thus gone one. And the Buddha in his lifetime referred to himself as the Tathagata, and other people referred to him as Tathagata. I think because he loved wordplay and language himself, the Buddha did, Shakyamuni Buddha. And this was a kind of an interesting play on words. He has thus come into the world, and he is thus gone. So Tathagata Garbha, which the Buddha himself didn't talk about in the early sutras, was left for this later time. And the Śrīmālā Devi Sutra is one of the first texts that talks about it. Now, there is a Tathagata Garbha Sutra, which is about the same time or a little bit before, which starts to lay the groundwork for what Buddha nature is. And but this was really a kind of built on that and became more famous in a way. So I wanted to just give a little overview of the text and point out a couple really interesting things. So the story, which is, again, this is in 200 or 300 CE, right? And so we know about the misogyny of the world, which of course continues today and was all the more rampant in ancient times. And yet here we have this sutra that's been upheld for generations of people, where it basically lauds in every way you could this wonderful female practitioner, lay practitioner. So the story goes, her parents actually, King Prasenajit and Queen Malika, had recently converted to Buddhism. So this was in the time of the Buddha, historically, so they say. Though this sutra was written some 600 or 700 years later. They had recently converted to Buddhism and loved the Buddha's teachings, and they wrote a letter to their daughter, Queen Srimala. And she received the letter, she read it, and she was moved. She touched it to her head, and she said something like, "Since I humbly submit that the Lord Buddha came for the sake of the world, he should be compassionate with me, allowing me to see him." And he appeared. And so through the power of her own aspiration and intention, she requested that he appear, and he did. And it says rays of light streamed everywhere, and he kind of appeared in heaven, but like amongst everyone there. And then they proceeded to have this sort of exchange where he said, "Wonderful, tell me about, what you want to say." And she started talking about Buddha nature, and she first took these 10 great vows and these 3 great vows of a bodhisattva. And he said, those vows encompass all the vows of a bodhisattva. And they're similar, but they're not exactly the same to the kinds of vows we take. And then she talks about the acceptance of true Dharma. And some of this, reading a Mahayana Sutra, at least for me, is never easy. You can't just kind of read it and understand it. There's always, in like every paragraph, you gotta, what's that word? You check the notes. And so I never really know, do I really understand this? It's probably best to think, no, I probably don't really understand it. So again, what I'm giving is just a very kind of superficial sense, perhaps, of what we look at, but just also inviting us all to, if this is something we're interested in, to take up in our own study. And so she talks about the acceptance of the true Dharma, which then becomes the Mahayana. Okay, it's a little sectarian, but okay. And then she talks about, you may have heard of the one vehicle, the Ekayana, where she kind of says that, well, it's not that there are different vehicles. There's like, the so-called Hinayana, or lesser vehicle, and then the great vehicle. It's all one vehicle, and everybody's on the same path, but they might not know it. Like, okay, that's interesting. She talks about the unlimited noble truths, which are distinct from the regular noble truths. And she then gives an introduction to the Tathagata itself, the Buddha nature doctrine, and some of what we've talked about. What's very interesting in this kind of exploration, she goes into a couple things which are pretty radical, actually, and I've never heard before, and I'm curious if they show up again, like the one noble truth, that there are, of the four noble truths that the Buddha taught, 3 of them are conditioned, and 1 is unconditioned. Can you guess which one is the unconditioned noble truth? I thought it was going to be number 4. But no, of course not. It was number 3, the extinction of suffering. And so she goes into an explication of why is the cessation or extinction of suffering the ultimate noble truth. And that noble truth becomes the one refuge. So instead of the 3 refuges, the ultimate refuge is the 3rd noble truth, the cessation of suffering. So all of that, again, is like much more study needed to comprehend that. But the thing that really got me actually in chapter 12 on the contrary truths, where Queen Srimala teaches about Buddha nature, making the startling claim for the first time, I think, in the literature, that ultimate reality actually possesses the 4 perfections of permanence, happiness, self, and purity. So whereas before in the Prajnaparamita teachings, we have a lot of emptiness language and kind of negation. So you just can't say what it is. If you can say anything, that's not it. He says, no, the actually Buddha nature does have positive qualities. You can't, it's not just negative. Permanence, happiness, self, and purity. And something clicked in my mind. Did anybody else catch that resonance? What's something else? If you put it in a different order. Hefker's got it.
From the as far as pure eternal joy. I won't get them right.
Good. Yes, Hefker. It's from the Enmei Jukku Kannon Gyo, when we say, being eternal, intimate, pure, and joyful, right? Now there's a trick in there due to the innovative translation of self as intimate. So in the Japanese, Jo Raku Ga Jo. So the first word Jo is eternal or permanent. So the opposite of anicca or impermanence. Raku, happy, blissful, joyful. Ga is self, which Roshi and Kaz translated as intimate, which I think makes total sense. It's just, and it's like, oh yeah, it's not about what is the self, which is conceptual. It's about like, what's this? And then Jo, or purity, clean. So Jo Raku Ga Jo, being eternal, intimate, pure, and joyful. And as they taught about one time, they changed the order. So, it's eternal, joyful, intimate, and pure. And I think you said, Roshi, if I remember right, you're like, you got to end with joy, not purity. So I love that. And so each Sunday, usually, we chant the Enmei Jukku Kannon Gyo. And so we're saying, this Avalokiteshvara, perceiver of the cries of the world, takes refuge in Buddha, will be a Buddha, helps all to be Buddhas, is not separate from Buddha Dharma Sangha, Buposo, being eternal, intimate, pure, and joyful, in the morning, be one with Avalokiteshvara. What does that mean? We're saying, be one with the 4 qualities of Buddha nature, which Avalokiteshvara is representing. So that is a call to us, the positive qualities. We so often, we can't talk about it, and it's kind of the negation, but I love that this was just popped out like, wow, there it is. Being eternal, intimate, pure, and joyful. Be one with Avalokiteshvara, whose heart moment by moment arises, whose heart moment by moment remains. So when I titled this talk, The Ultimate Inspiration, that's what I was referring to. Both the highest kind of inspiration. Like what can really call to our deepest aspirations and call us into the practice and action that we wish to engage in this world. And so embodying the qualities of Buddha nature, actualizing our own Buddha nature, which we're taught is here and now already. That is the aspiration that you could call ultimate. And then, of course, it's also a play on ultimate because it's the aspiration or the inspiration that is about the ultimate, inspiration for the ultimate. I'm glad you like that, Senko. So that's kind of that's the chapter 23 of, let's see. Oh, sorry, I meant 13, chapter 13, not chapter 23. There are 15 chapters. And so she goes into that and talks about Queen Srimala goes into the positive qualities of the Buddha, of the Tathagata Garbha, Buddha nature. And then again, another really interesting chapter on the inherently pure, which is related to this. She talks about the Tathagata Garbha, which serves as both the basis for samsara and nirvana. So Tathagata Garbha is not just the pure substrate of nirvana and then the defiled, all the bad stuff is like somewhere else. No, the ultimate, the absolute, sometimes we call it, is inclusive, is absolutely, totally inclusive of samsara and nirvana. So you can't say like the absolute as opposed to the relative. That absolute that's opposed to the relative is actually the relative absolute. It's an absolute, relatively speaking. The absolute is not separate from the relative, which doesn't make sense, logically. But there it is. And so so she's teaching about this, and the Buddha's like, very good, Śrīmālā Devi. You're right. It's true that Tathagata Garbha is inherently pure, but appearing defiled creates the philosophical problem of how does a pure mind become contaminated? How does this absolute purity that is the core of our nature, that's the basis of all of reality, ever get defiled in the first place? How could something so pristine do that? And he doesn't answer the question. He's just like, yep, that's something only the Buddhas can understand. And it's like, oh, great, thank you. He actually says that a lot, and it's kind of like, really? You're going to pull that one? Only the Buddhas can understand it. So, but that should inspire you, right? Good, I got to become a Buddha so I can understand what this really means. And in fact, I do find that kind of inspiring too. And so it's interesting because this is one of the things I love about reading a text like this is you feel the resonances, you hear the resonances in our liturgies, like we've seen. And then what does that sound like to you, this from chapter 23? Well, if we're inherently pure, how do we ever get defiled? Doesn't that remind you of something?
Dust settling on a white jewel. The dust settles, and so you have to keep cleaning it and practicing with it.
The story of Huineng, okay. Oh, good.
Nobody means by practice.
Yeah.
Dogen's question.
That's what I'm thinking. That's what occurred to me too, Baizan. Dogen's question, if we're already enlightened, why do we practice? That's the question that drove him, to go travel, to journey into a faraway land, which he says, why do you need to do that? But he did it to find an answer to this question. And his response to that turned into this beautiful non-dual teaching on enlightenment or practice realization. Practice and realization are one. They're not separate. And so practice is not about achieving a future goal of Buddhahood, but it's enacting the Buddha that you already are. And Buddhahood is not something that you just kind of, well, I better not say that because that wouldn't be true, but it goes both ways. We enact Buddhahood, and Buddhahood is actualized through our sitting practice. And so the close of the sutra concludes in chapter 15 with the Buddha's return to where he came from, probably Jeddah Grove, I think, after his visit to the Queen Srimala's kingdom. And he says, Ananda, go get the, what's his name? Go get the king of the gods, Chakra. Go get Chakra, the king of the gods. I got to tell him about this. And Ananda's like, okay. So he goes and calls the king of the 33 realms of the god. I mean, it's like God, basically. The Buddha asks for Chakra's presence, the king of the gods, and says, we just got this amazing teaching from Queen Srimala of Ayodhya, and you have to learn this, you have to disseminate it, and you have to practice it from now on. And you have to like make sure that everyone knows this teaching. It's a kind of a typical form in the Mahayana sutras that you kind of wonder, well, is this why they're so famous? Is because they say they need to be practiced and studied and so forth. But I'm sure there were other ones that said that too, that never actually got passed around. But you know, they had to go viral somehow in order to, so they have their methods. But he goes through and gives a kind of point by point explanation, and Chakra, the king of the gods, is like, that's an amazing teaching, and we're going to do this and we're going to put it into the practice. Thank you so much. So that's a little touch into the Śrīmālā Devi Sutra. I hope that it wasn't too heady or philosophical. I don't know if you can feel my my inspiration for this is very much not like, oh, I want to understand the texts of Buddhism, but to really know, like, what are we doing here? What is this really about for us? And I loved the things that you all tossed out about what is awakening, what is Buddha nature, why do we practice? I think what it really comes down to is, how are we with each other? For me, how can I be present with someone? Like Roshi and Frank were last week, just able to be there. And I spend a lot of time with my 4-year-old daughter now, and she does not let me multitask most of the time. It's like full attention, please, and if you don't, consequences. So she's of course one of my Zen teachers, and but it helps me to remember that. I mean, this sounds trite in a way, but life is just so much better when you're present. I am so much better when I am present, when I'm really with someone and not doing too many things at once or thinking about what I'm going to say. And in a way, all of our practices here at Upaya and contemplative practice in general is so much about unitasking and about just doing one thing at a time so that we can train in presence, maybe so that we can both reveal our own Buddha nature for ourselves and so that we can see it. Like if I really believe Shinryu is a Buddha and I can be with that in presence, then whatever he says, whether it's about, bicycle parts that we need to order or a car ride, or it's like, oh, Buddha and the bicycle. What would that be like if we could really be with each person as Buddha, as an expression of Buddha nature? It's 6:31, and I just have to say that Dogen has a fascicle. Oh, that's 23. That's why I was thinking 23. Dogen's fascicle 23 on Buddha nature is incredible. And I just started reading it because I was like, oh, he has a fascicle on Buddha nature. I better check that out. And I got completely sucked into it and almost changed the topic at 10 o'clock last night, which would have been a very bad idea, because all I would have wanted to do is just read the fascicle, but it's beautiful. And I hope we can study together, because he doesn't, you might think like, oh, Dogen has this view on Buddha nature, but he goes through all of these stories from traditional koans and talks about some sutra pieces and just does his Dogen thing and turns your mind around. And you just get this feeling for something that can't be put into words in a way that's for me so powerful, even compared to the sutras. Dogen is just this poetry of Buddha nature that's breathtaking. So we won't get into that, but he has some interesting things to say about Buddha nature, maybe tomorrow. So I just want to end with a poem that struck me as in line with this, attributed to Hafiz or by Hafiz, but translated in perhaps a creative way. And it goes like this, it's short. I wish I could show you, when you are lonely or in darkness, the astonishing light of your own being. I wish I could show you, when you are alone or in darkness, the astonishing light of your own being. Thank you all for your presence and your Buddha nature.